Alright, so today we are going to install injectors. These are the Injector Dynamics 1050x 1050 cc per minute injectors. We're also going to be adding this Radium fuel rail. This is the kit that includes the OEM line interface and a bunch of fittings so that you can use the stock regulator and attach the stock feed line. I've also got a bin of connectors, so when you get these injectors, you can get them with plug and play connectors, or you can get them with the connectors that you crimp on. So I'm going to be doing the crimp on ones. I've also got this crimping tool. I have to find the part number, but I got it off of Amazon. I believe that's the actual part number of it. It should work. Most crimps are fairly similar. I've got several different crimping tools that should work, but this is the one we're going to use. Alright, so here's a quick look of what it is inside the engine bay of the stock fuel rail. And the line connects back here. But before we undo any of this, we want to release the fuel pressure, and the best way to do this is actually inside the car. So we're going to go inside. I'm going to show you the fuse box in the kick panel. It's called the ETAX ECU. We're going to pull the plug that powers the fuel pump, and we're going to try to start the car. And what will happen is the car is going to crank over, and it might run for a moment, but then as the fuel pressure drops, it should stumble and die. Therefore, relieving the fuel pressure in the rail, we can start taking this apart safely without getting fuel squirted in our eyes, pretty much. Alright, so we're entering the car. We've got a light shining in here. Now if you look on the ETAX ECU, you'll see this 30 amp green fuse and a blue and white connector next to it above the red and black, the big connector. We're going to pull that wiring out. It's just a simple connector. You basically squeeze down the tab and pull out. That's going to remove power from the fuel pump. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to set the camera down so I can see what I'm doing. Alright, so you guys can see from the bottom, this is the camera sitting on the floorboard looking up at the ETAX ECU. I'm going to reach in here. I'm going to press the tab on this side. I'm going to pull out. You can see this is the connector. The blue and white wire. This is the one you want to pull out. This is the one that's going to remove the power from the fuel pump. Well, as you can see, it did not start, so we have pretty much drained all the fuel pressure that we can. And now we can start removing bolts and disconnecting lines. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and we're going to remove this charge pipe, because it's going to kind of be in the way. It'll give us a little more room to work, plus we're going to have to pull some wiring harness out of the way. We're also going to have to pull these lines that go to the catch can, which is the MAP Performance catch can in this case. So let's go ahead and start. Oops. Already bumped the GoPro with my head. Alright, let's go ahead and loosen this fitting. Now we're going to go ahead and unplug the injectors and remove the harness that's in the way. In order to properly do this, you might need a flathead screwdriver to get some of the connectors out. Alright. Now I did unplug the rear cam sensor, as well as the another sensor here, I believe, which is also for the cam. Okay, I'm sorry, that's the MIVEX solenoid. This is the cam sensor. And that should give me enough room to move this out of the way. and start taking stuff apart. In fact, let's do a little bit further. Let's go ahead, pull the coil packs, because most of these connectors are easy to put back on and it's pretty obvious where they go. So now you can see we've got pretty much the harness all completely out of the way. Right over here is the feed line for the fuel rail. We're going to go ahead and disconnect this first so that we can get some of the fuel out and let it evaporate before we pull the rail off. So we'll do that first while we're loosening all the bolts. Go ahead and stuff a couple rags down here. There's a little red clip on here. I'm going to stick the screwdriver underneath it so that we can pull it out sideways. You don't have to pull this completely off, you just need to have it come out that far. So about halfway. And then the line should slide off. I'm going to go ahead and put this rag here, move that out of the way. Before we remove the bolts, I want to go ahead and pull this line going from the fuel pressure regulator to the intake manifold. Alright, so we've taken it off of there. We also need to remove the return line from here. We are going to reuse this. So actually we could probably just remove this part, unbolt it. In fact, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this line off here, unbolt it from all its points and move it out of the way. And don't drop your clamp like that. That's what I should have done from the beginning. Make sure you have your magnetic tray to put all your hardware in. Alright. So we've removed all the hardware. And when the fuel return, we can go ahead and pivot that out of the way. Now, that was a 10mm bolt for all the fuel return stuff. For the fuel rail itself, I believe it's a 12mm. Looks like we may also need to pull this piece off real quick, so let's do that because it's kind of in the way. If your Evo doesn't have these parts on it for the fuel return line, you need to take it to the dealer, because I believe that was a recall. And the recall is because that fuel line vibrates, the return line, it'll crack and leak fuel and cause a fire. So if you don't have these pieces that I'm taking off now, you probably should. Alright, get the 12. Yep, 12mm. These are pretty long bolts. There's a spacer below these, so we want to make sure we don't lose the spacer. Now, this motor is pretty clean because it's pretty much a new motor, so I'm not too worried about dropping anything in there, but you might want to blow it out with air. Get any dirt, sand kind of out of the way before you pull it, because you don't want that going into the cylinder bore. Alright, well, we kind of dropped one spacer, but I see it, so we should be able to get it. We're going to take this fuel rail and set it to the side. Alright, got it. Thank goodness. These are plastic, so they're not magnetic at all. So if you drop them in there, good luck. They're going to be hard to find. You might have to take a lot of stuff apart. So basically this fuel rail is going to go in like this. We're going to have to reuse those spacers with our new injectors. So let's go ahead and go back to the bench and set this fuel rail up for the new injectors. Alright, to set up the Radium fuel rail, we're going to need a couple things from the other fuel rail. And we're also going to need some of the parts that came with the Radium. So you're going to have all these bags of parts. We're not going to need this fitting yet. That's going to go on the car side. We are going to need this U-shaped, horseshoe-shaped fitting. which when you got the kit, it's also going to have a fitting that you thread into here. You put the plug in here, and then you put the feed adapter on this side. So I've already set up the rail ahead of time. You're also going to need the bolts. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the injector clips off the stock fuel rail and the regulator, because we're going to reuse all that stuff. So with our flathead screwdriver, we're going to go ahead and well, we actually don't need it. We can do this by hand. We just pull those clips off. We're going to reuse those. And then on the end with the regulator, we're going to need, I believe, a 10mm socket. And just because I've got new toys, I'm going to go ahead and use this. Well, that wasn't smart. Okay, make sure you hold this good. Should have known better. Oh, by the way, there's still going to be fuel in this rail, so before we pull that regulator out, let's grab this clip off the floor. Let's put this stuff to the side. Before we pull the regulator out, let's go ahead and get some rags to put underneath it. Alright, I'm going to take the fuel rail and put it somewhere outside to the drain. Okay, we're back. We got the regulator, got a lot of fuel out of it, so we're not going to make as much of a mess. We're going to need this horseshoe fitting. What you'll notice is if you look closely, there's a cut on it. So when you put it together, the cut goes that way so that it sits flush. See how it sits flush? You don't want to put it on this way. You want to put it on the other way. Alright. Okay. I'm going to go ahead, stick our fuel rail in, insert the regulator into the rail. So you can see how that is. And it can swivel because it's not tight. We're going to go ahead and put the 2 bolts that came with the kit on it, and that should secure it in place. Okay, so 5mm Allen key. Make sure we tighten these up pretty good. Now, just so you know, this is okay that it swivels because there's an O-ring in there, so the O-ring will keep it sealed. So no matter how tight you tighten it, it shouldn't stop moving completely, but it should be sealed, so you should be okay. Let's go ahead and cut open our injectors. We're going to go ahead and get rid of this trash here. We've got our injectors. We've got our injector clips. We've got the regulator on the rail. We basically need to insert these. So when it's sitting in the vehicle like this, the plugs are facing to this side. So we're going to insert the top part in with the plug facing that way, which in this case is towards where I'm standing. Now you may want to put a little bit of oil or something on the seal to help it go in. I've got a little bit of this grease that I use that's water repellent. I'm just going to put a tiny little bit on, just enough to help us seat this sucker. Start down here, just kind of carefully wiggle it in, making sure not to cut the seal. Right? Once we've got one in, we've got it oriented the correct way. We want to make sure that it's pushed in all the way. So you can see, we're going to take the clip, and you see a little slot there. We want to make sure the clip goes into the slot and then snaps around, so you can't pull the injector out. Now I accidentally pulled off the extension tip. A lot of Injector Dynamics injectors have these extenders or adapters to fit the vehicle application. You can see it's a Bosch style injector underneath. We're going to go ahead and repeat that 3 more times, and we'll be ready to put the fuel rail back in the car. Alright, so we've got it done. Want to make sure that all the clips are correctly inserted and that we have them in the slots before we go put this in the vehicle. I'm also going to put a little bit of that same grease around these O-rings to make it easier to get it to seat. Our rail is ready. Let's go ahead and stick this in the car and bolt it down. Alright, let's go ahead and carefully install this in here. It's not too hard, we'll just guide it in slowly. Make sure all the injectors are lined up, their bore. Slowly wiggle it in. Making sure not to... we don't want to cut any of the injector O-rings. So we've got it in. I'm going to go ahead and grab the hardware and the spacer. I'm not sure what the torque spec is on these. Somebody can add that in the comments if they want, but we're going to use Gutentite for today. That should be good enough. The rail came with these 2 bolts here for us to reattach the return line. Let's go ahead and take them out temporarily. Make sure not to drop them. Alright, so it was pretty much invisible to you guys, but I spent a good half hour getting that clip out of the bottom. Probably because I had to take the whole under tray off. So let's go ahead and put it somewhere safe in there. We're going to go ahead and start putting the return rail back on. In order to do that, let's go ahead and add this right here. Start this hand threaded in. Alright, so last thing, get the return line in place, put the return feed back on, and try not to lose the clamp like I did. Alright, return line is on. We want to go ahead and way over here, we want to put the vacuum line back onto the regulator. If you haven't done it, now's probably a good time to go ahead and put a zip tie on these 2. That way it doesn't pop off and your fuel pressure stays consistent. Alright, so now we're done with the bolts. These are left over. These were holding the old fuel rail and regulator on. We don't need them anymore, so we're going to put those to the side. What we need to do now is we need to take the last part of the fuel rail, which is this adapter fitting, and way back there we need to find where the hose, the fuel feed line hose, attaches, and we need to replace it with this so we can connect the hose that they gave us. Alright, so this is going to be a little bit difficult to see because it's buried back there. We're going to take the fuel line off in the back over here, basically pivot this cover up. It's hard to see. I'll show you guys when I get it off. And drop it just like I do everything else. And then there's a red clip which you push off to the side. Then you pull up. And of course you get fuel everywhere. And you can snake this out. Alright, so got the line out. You can see here's the red clip that you push out. You just push on one side and it opens up. It allows you to slip it right off. Alright, so let's show you inside. So you see that line there right above the white connector? That's the fuel feed line. We pulled the fitting off. We're going to put the new fitting on. So this fitting has a little piece that goes on the side. We're going to take that off temporarily. We've got to sit this on there and then carefully put this over the side and tighten it down, which is going to be kind of difficult not to drop this screw. So my track record's not doing so good today. I've dropped everything I can in the engine bay. Let's hope we don't drop the screw because it's going to be a pain. Maybe I should have left the under tray off. So we're going to try to outsmart it this time so I don't drop screws, at least the little screw. I might drop the whole piece. I basically put a piece of blue tape over it to hold the screw in with a little hole for my Allen wrench to fit through. Let's go ahead and stuff this fitting on there and see if we can get this thing started. Alright, I call that a success. Let's make sure it's tight and that it's not coming off of there. Alright, you can see we got it on there pretty good. Good rule of thumb is if you pull up, it shouldn't slide off. If it slides off, then you didn't get the clamp around the lip on the line, and it's going to pop right off as soon as it sees fuel pressure. So double check it, make sure. Now we put the fuel line on, route it to the rail, and start reconnecting everything. Alright, so now we have our fuel hose. You notice this has two different ends on it. We have a 45 and a 90. Now the 90 should probably go to the fuel feed over by the firewall, and the 45 should go to the rail. So let's go ahead and get this on there hand snug so we can tighten it up. I'm going to start with the fuel rail side, and then I'm going to route it to the firewall. I'm just going to do this by hand. Until we get it situated where we want it to run, and then we will go ahead and tighten it. Just be careful when you're doing this one not to swing too hard and break that. You don't want to break that cam sensor because then you'll have something else to replace. Now these are special AN wrenches I got from Jegs a long time ago. These are -6s. I don't have the size for the other bigger, but this should get most of the fuel rails on. They're made out of aluminum. So we got them both tightened all the way using AN wrenches and an adjustable wrench. Now let's move on to wiring, the fun part. So basically, these connectors, the 4 of them that go to the injectors, need to have the connectors replaced. So that's going to be the fun part. Let's see how close I can get the GoPro, but it looks like I'm running out of battery, so I might do a lot of this off camera and just show one example. Alright, so I've gone ahead and I've put all the harness back, I did all the connectors, and the reason why I decided to do it off camera is because I did one, and after looking at it, I thought, you know, it's kind of an advanced technique to re-pin these. So if you haven't ever done a weather pack style connector, I would honestly suggest you either look up some tutorials and make sure you have the right tools first, or it's probably just easier to get the plug-and-play connectors for the Evo 10. That's going to save you a lot more time, because it probably took me a good 45 minutes, maybe an hour to repin these for, because I was very meticulous in making sure that I cleaned them off and got good solid crimps so that everything should be good. So I've got them all connected again. I put the wiring harness back in place. Everything electronically should be sorted. Fuel lines connected. New injectors and rail are obviously in. We did that a while ago. Even though you guys, it probably looks like it just happened in the video. I've been working on this for probably 3 hours today just because filming takes a long time. Now I'm going to put the intercooler pipe, the upper intercooler pipe back on, and also we're going to reconnect the catch can. So let's do that real quick. And then we're going to move on to the last step, which is basically updating the file on the ECU for the larger than injector. So let's go. Well, that was part one. So got the fuel rail installed. I've decided that I'm going to go ahead and make this a 2 or 3 parter. We'll see, because I still have to do a fuel pump, and the injector scaling is going to take some time too, because I'd like to go through the tuning process, because you got to plug in some numbers, do a little bit of data logging, and then adjust them a little bit. So it's not just straightforward. We're going to go ahead and walk through that process, and basically I'm going to turn this into a multi-part fuel system upgrade for my Evo 10 in preparation for the new turbo, which I haven't told you guys about. Bye.